was going to do a different intro, but a slide that I removed is an important equation that we should all know, which is happiness equals results minus expectations. Happiness equals results minus expectations. Does it make sense? So as she raised the bar, she by definition compressed all your happiness. Does it make sense? So I was going to produce a certain set of results, and that got compressed.
Weak theory. I think it's Buddhist.
I'm sure it is. As all wonderful thoughts are, they were 2,000 years old in another place. This particular formulation of that equation, though, was by one of the Cartot guys, Tom Mayatsi, the older guy who has since passed away, but he's totally awesome. Okay, attitude determines altitude. And yeah, as you saw me futzing around, like if I had the attitude that this wasn't going to work, I'd be super stressed right now. And hopefully we'll see if I am or not. Cool. So I want to talk about why our attitude helps us to be better humans, better engineers, better leaders, and what we can do about it. And I am an engineer, so that talk that that Catherine mentioned was not about this fuzzy stuff. It was about microservices and like really hardcore distributed systems problems, and that's what I usually talk about. So this is a bit of a departure for me, but not because I don't think this is important, but because, as we'll talk about later, I think I didn't feel like I had enough to say to make it worth saying, if that makes any sense. So hopefully we'll see if that's true. In recognition and memorialization of Catherine's last name of Kirk and Vanessa's last name of Spock, we have, of course, a reference to Star Trek, the original Star Trek. So this is, of course, Khan. And he says, improve a mechanical device and you may double productivity, but improve man and you gain 1,000-fold. Can't do, try to do the Ricardo Montalban a little bit. But yeah, so mechanical devices, right? So that's our systems. We can only make so much improvement there. But if we can actually improve ourselves, we really do orders of magnitude improvement. Okay, in what ways will we improve ourselves today? We will improve ourselves in the form of growth mindset. We will talk about trust, and we'll talk about confidence. And in all these things, there is a spectrum, right? So it is not best to dial all these things to 11. The person that believes most in the growth mindset, exactly to Catherine's point earlier, was, oh my God, I'm never good enough. Does it make sense? The extension of continuous improvement is, oh my God, I'm terrible, I need to keep improving. Does that make sense? So we actually don't even want to be there emotionally. And we also don't want to be in the fixed mindset of I can't get better. Instead, we want to be in that center where I know I can improve and I can do it steadily. Yeah? So there you go. So let's talk about growth mindset and how we can kind of be in the center of the spectrum. So growth mindset as a concept comes from Dr. Carol Dweck of Stanford University. She's a psychologist. She wrote a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And her idea here is that our self-theories, what we believe about the fundamental nature of intelligence, the fundamental nature of talent, that is what is going to affect how we do more than anything else. Does it make sense what I'm saying? It is our belief about whether we can improve that is going to help us actually improve. And the most effective way we can improve is to know that we can. So what does that mean in practice? She differentiates between these two ideas of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. By the way, these can apply to humans, also to organizations, and obviously to companies. But in the fixed mindset, if we were a fixed mindset, we would believe that talent is static, right? We are born with a certain level of, I don't know, skill in mathematics or a certain aptitude for music or something like that, and we're not ever going to be able to improve. And so if we believe that, and we want to look smart, like I kind of want to look smart in front of all of you, especially with the bar raising that we had earlier, that's going to lead people to a tendency to avoid challenges. Does it make sense? Like if I can't improve, why should I challenge myself because I might look stupid? And if there are obstacles along the way, I'm likely to give up, again, because I'm not likely to improve. I'm going to see effort as fruitless rather than something that can improve me or the system. When I get feedback, either positive or negative, I'm going to ignore it. And then I'm going to be, and this is the most important part, I am going to be threatened by other people's success rather than be inspired by it, right? Again, back to Catherine's talk earlier this morning. But in the growth mindset, where we should all hopefully be, and we can work on this, is that we should think of talent as something that can be developed rather than something that we are born with, which should give us a desire to learn and a tendency to embrace challenges rather than avoid them, to persist through obstacles rather than giving up with them, to see effort as a path to mastery, to being better, rather than effort as something that is fruitless, to learn from criticism rather than to hide from it, and most importantly, again, to be inspired by other people's success rather than threatened by it. Does this make sense? Cool. So she goes on to say, well, how do we get there? And how we get there is not by, I don't know, thinking and feeling, it's by doing, right? How are we going to get there? It's by actual effort. And what I love is this idea here, is that effort is one of those things that is going to help us get better, help us get to mastery, and is the way that we are going to improve through that mindset. And effort means that we actually care about something, right? Putting in effort as we do, in our personal relationships, with our families, with our organizations, that's a sign that we care, right? Does that make sense? It's a sign that something's important, and it's a sign that we're willing to work for it. So very similarly, Scientific American did in 2006 a sort of summary of the studies about how people become experts. You can see the cover page called The Expert Mind. And the quotation that I took away here, I remember actually reading, I subscribed to this actual physical magazine at this time, and I remember reading the article. And the preponderance of psychological evidence is that experts are made, not born, right? So it's not a theory. It's not a belief. I sure would like to improve, but oh, that's not true in real life. In real life, that is true. And we'll start talking about some examples in a moment. And it's that effortful study, putting effort in again and again and again and again, that gets somebody to being an excellent chess player, an expert in classical music, a great football or soccer player, and lots of other fields. Does it make sense? The I guess meme that comes out of this is Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours, right? So this Malcolm Gladwell is a wonderful popular science writer. I really like him. He's got a wonderful style and wonderful books. Outliers is one of my personal favorites. And the thing that a lot of people take away from this is this idea of it takes 10,000 hours of effortful work in order to become a master in something. And if you do the math, like 10,000 hours is a lot of hours, right? That's full-time every hour for every working day, 5 full years. And that's actually not how it goes, right? Because you can't sustain, as we learned earlier, you can't sustain, from Dunningkruger's talk, you can't sustain full concentration and full effort constantly forever. You'll strip your gears, right? Or you'll overheat your engine, or whatever's the metaphor you'd like to use. But still, it's 10,000 hours of a deliberate practice that make great hockey players, great soccer players, great chess players. Does it make sense? Cool. Practice is not the thing that we do once we're good. It's the thing that we do that makes us good. Yeah? Think of, is there anybody in the room that feels like, oh, I'm great at, I don't know, Scala, or I'm great at low-level C++, and you were born with that? Anybody feel like, yeah, I came in and it's immediately what made sense to me? Let the record show that no hands went up, right? All of us practicing our craft, practice it, practice the craft. We're doing it every day, and we get better, and that's exactly how we get better, as opposed to sort of, being born with it. Great. How will we approach those 10,000 hours, right? 10,000 hours is a lot of effort, and it's hard to sustain that. So Dr. Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School studied that. How is it that people are able to continually progress and become experts? And you will be shocked to learn that a lot of it is about your approach, your emotions, your perceptions, and your motivations as you're going along. She likes to say your inner work life is the thing that helps sustain you through those 10,000 hours of potentially grueling effort. Making progress on meaningful work, things that actually matter to you and matter to your organization and matter maybe to your family, that's the thing that keeps us motivated and keeps us performing. But the most important thing, very directly related to Agile, by the way, is that steady progress and small, consistent wins are the way to do it, right? So what you are not doing here, what, for example, great swimmers or great soccer players are not doing is nothing, all of a sudden, kaboom, they're able to do it. Does it make sense? That's crazy to think that would be the way it works. The way that works. Instead, what it is just consistently improving a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and evolution and like agile practices and like lots of things, the accumulation of small changes is what ends up being a really big change. Does it make sense? Cool. All right. How are, the other half of how we're going to do it is focus and attention. And again, this is back to what Catherine said earlier. So psychologist Daniel Goleman reviewed sort of the literature around focus in this book in 2013. And what he concluded is that our ability to focus, something that he called cognitive control, we'll talk about that in a moment, but our ability to focus is the best predictor of our success and our high achievement. Again, why? It's because it's the way that we sustain those 10,000 hours, and it's the way that we continue to make forward progress and getting better. What do I mean by focus? There's actually a physiological part to this. So focus is the ability to moderate between two very different parts of the human brain. So the top-down higher brain, which is called the neocortex, this is what the part of the brain that's executive function. This is like deliberation, decision-making, reflection, self-awareness. Who knows Latin? What does neo mean? New. So the neocortex is the newest part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that is the human part of the brain as distinct from the animal part. Does it make sense? This is the thing that differentiates us in our 0.1% of difference of DNA with the chimpanzees. Like this is the difference, right? So it's modulating or moderating between that top-down higher brain and the bottom-up lower brain, one of the oldest parts of vertebrate brains, which is called the amygdala. And that is the source of emotion, of motivation. And so rather than being deliberative, it's impulsive. And rather than being reflective, it's uncontrolled. And so focus is moderating between these two forces, right? Using the top-down higher brain to kind of modulate the lower brain. The lower brain is where our strength comes from, and the higher brain is where our kind of direction comes from. Does that make sense? Cool. And as Goleman points out, in order for us to make forward progress, particularly in creative disciplines like ours, creativity comes from that top-down, that higher level brain. So that's unexpected connections between two things. Like, who has great ideas in the shower? I do. I mean, to the extent that I have good ideas, like maybe the best ones are in the shower, let's say it that way. When I'm running, when it's quiet, when I'm driving by myself, like when the brain is quiet, that is the time, I mean, everybody's nodding, right? That's the time where we're able to make those random, weird connections. And if all we did was daydream, I will say the German in me, like, nope, like that's not enough. Like what you have to do is do something, right? That's the other part. And so that execution comes from, okay, we got the daydream, we got the creative idea, now we have to focus and bear down and actually do it. And here the focus is helping us be resistant to distraction. Does it make sense? So that, that deliberative decision-making function is about moderating away all those things that otherwise would distract us. Is that making sense? Cool. So the thing that I know lots of people are gonna love. So who has a kind of mindfulness practice, meditation, mindfulness, yoga? Lots of hands in the room. This is super obvious to you who practice this, but it now should be obvious to everybody. From the perspective of cognitive science, every single like meditation technique, every single mindfulness practice is all about what do we focus on, what do we put our attention to, what do we care about in the moment. Does it make sense? Cool. All right. Albert Einstein. It's not that I'm so smart. It's just that I stay with problems longer. Right? He didn't come, the general relativity, special relativity, the photoelectric effect, these things didn't spring into Einstein's brain unbidden, but they were creative things which helped him, allowed him to make these different connections, but also a consistent focus on those problems for year after year after year allowed him to see things that maybe others hadn't. Cool. So that was growth mindset. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about trust. So again, there is a spectrum, right? So we would like to be in the center where we sort of, I don't know, trust but verify, as that old Russian proverb that Reagan used to quote says. We do not want to be on the left-hand side, which is sort of distrust, right? That's the lack of trust. But there's also a right-hand side, which I'll call naivete, right? We don't want to trust where that trust isn't warranted. Does it make sense? So again, we want to kind of be in the center of the distribution, the mathematician in me wants to say. And so yeah, so we want to kind of be right in the center of that spectrum. All right, cool. Who's heard of this theory X, theory Y? Handful. Great, I will tell you all about it. So Dr. Douglas McGregor in 1960 wrote this book called The Human Side of Enterprise. It's quoted in the DevOps Handbook, in Lean Enterprise, so if you read those things, here's where you can learn more about it. What McGregor says is that leadership's, in an organization, leadership's beliefs about what motivates employees are super powerful. And I don't particularly like these terms, but whatever, I didn't make them up. For him, theory X was this. I believe that people are inherently lazy, that they lack self-motivation, and therefore they need to be micromanaged, right? Has anybody ever worked in an organization or with a person that believed like this? Actually, you probably don't have to raise your hand publicly, but I bet people do. Yeah, cool. I've definitely worked with people like this. Theory Y, on the other hand, believe that people are intrinsically motivated, yeah? And the job of leadership is not to micromanage, it's to get out of their way. Right? This is where servant leadership comes from. This is where being supportive as a leader, this is where kind of a bottom-up organization comes from. This is this idea. And that people genuinely want to do a good job. They genuinely want to seek ownership. And again, the job of leadership is to help kind of liberate them and empower them and help make that happen. And the interesting or maybe horrible aspect of this is that these are fundamental beliefs about what other humans are like. It is hard to change. If you are a theory X person, it is hard to change to theory Y. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's hard. Again, because it comes from a fundamental belief about what other humans are like. Does it make sense what I'm saying? I won't give any details, but I have absolutely worked for bosses who were theory X. And when I demonstrated theory Y type things like, hey, I was able to improve the organizational effectiveness without firing people and without threats and without blaming. I thought that sort of demonstrating that would be sufficient. And then I read about this and I was like, oh, now I get it. Does it make sense? Cool. All right. This diagram is not mine, but I think it's really nice. In that theory X side, management is kind of pushing down authoritarianistically on the staff. Yuck. Whereas theory Y, management's on the bottom, staff's on the top, management is sort of supporting and empowering the employees to liberating them to do a really good job. Does this make sense? Would people, this is a softball, would people rather be in a theory X organization or a theory Y organization? Yeah, cool. Well, let's talk about the science behind that. So the science behind, if you read Lean Enterprise, if you read DevOps Handbook, if you read Accelerate, all of these books are about, in one part, this idea. And they use an organizational model from a guy named Ron Westrom, who talks about 3 different flavors of organization. There's sort of the pathological organization, which I'll call a theory X style organization, managed through fear and threat and micromanagement. In the middle is a sort of bureaucratic organization, so it's rules and processes and about compliance. That's kind of in the middle. But where you really would like to be, and the science proves this, by the way, is in a generative organization where it's about trust, it's about sharing. When the messenger of bad things comes, you don't shoot the messenger, you celebrate him or her. Does it make sense? And the data shows that, by the way, if you're in a generative organization, you're way more likely to deploy faster, have smaller MTTR, all those engineering metrics that we care about. And oh, by the way, your organizations are also 2.5 times more likely to exceed their goals on productivity and profitability and real business things. So these things actually matter. Does that make sense? Cool. Psychological safety. Who's heard this term? Yeah, almost everybody. That's awesome. So Google, being Google, did a study on their own organizations over several years, and they were trying to figure out what was the differentiator between teams that really performed well and teams that didn't perform well. And of course, going in, engineers had a bunch of theories about, oh, well, it's probably the experience level of the team, it's probably maybe the skill makeup, it's probably how long people have been at Google. Like, nope, none of that stuff. The best predictor for team success at Google was this thing called psychological safety. Another way to say that is, does your team feel comfortable and safe and welcoming and inclusive for interpersonal risk-taking. That's just a fancy way of saying, if I bring my whole self to work, if I bring my race to work, if I bring my gender to work, if I bring my sexual orientation to work, if I bring my political approach to work, all these things, showing my true self is safe and accepted and sort of included within the organization. Does it make sense? When teams feel like everybody can bring their full selves to work, they actually perform better. And it was, again, as I mentioned, it's more important than any of the other factors, any of the other sort of obvious factors, like, again, the skill level, the experience level, et cetera, of the team. None of those things mattered. What did matter, though, was whether people felt included in the organization. Does this make sense? Yeah. Cool. If you do not live in an organization that is one of those generative organizations that has psychological safety, I have a wonderful quote for you from Martin Fowler. If you can't change your organization, change your organization. Yeah? Cool. All right. The last thing I want to talk about is about confidence. Again, it is a spectrum. So we would like to be in the center where we are confident. Obviously, but we don't want to be fearful, right? We would like to be sufficiently confident that we're not, super worried. But also the other side of that is, I'll call arrogance, right? So we do not want to be overconfident. We want to be sort of just the right level of confident, if it makes sense. Yeah? Okay. So cool. I like this quote from Henry Ford. Whether you think that you can or you can't, you're usually right. Cool. I want to talk about, we say imposter syndrome, but it's more correctly, apparently in the literature, referred to as the imposter phenomenon. So I have absolutely experienced imposter syndrome very personally and very relatively recently in my life. I can tell that story maybe if we have a little bit of time. But when I started researching about it, I learned quite interestingly that the initial studies around imposter phenomenon, look at the date here, 1978, were actually about high-performing women in industry. Whoa, right? We have a big problem, no surprise by the way, guys, particularly guys, I'm talking to you. We have a big problem in our industry around attracting, retaining, and including underrepresented groups, of which women is only one of them. So really getting this idea of imposter phenomenon, understanding it and working with it is particularly important for you and also for your teams. So people are probably familiar with the idea, but in this particular study, they defined it in this way, that despite objective academic and professional achievements, these high-performing women in industry were experiencing this so-called imposter phenomenon, and they persisted in believing that they were really, not very smart, and they just fooled everybody. Okay. A later study by MIT researchers, specifically in our industry of computer science, also found this same thing. And oh, by the way, what they termed professional role confidence actually predicts that persistence. Does it make sense? Like how confident you are in whether the role that you have is a good match for your skills and interests and so on, that, as you might imagine, predicts how persistent you're going to be in continuing to move forward. And oh, by the way, women's, in this study, relative lack of this confidence, let's underline relative, so relative to men, the relative lack of the confidence in the women in the study contributed to their attrition and leaving the industry. So this is a big thing that we need to solve altogether. Not just for women anymore, though. Imposterism actually affects everybody. So this later study showed that 70% of the people will experience at one form or another this imposter phenomenon in their lives. 70%. That's a lot. I'll say I'm in that 70, by the way. I've definitely experienced it more than once. Yeah, and it's not fun. So let's talk about how confidence can really help us, and then let's talk further about how we can get and encourage and sustain our personal confidence. So I want to tell a story from this book. Has anybody read this book called Creativity, Inc.? Yeah, so it's by one of the founders of Pixar, Ed Catmull. Before there was Pixar, before really there was even computer animation in a serious way in any feature film, he, as a computer science researcher in computer graphics, was asked by Lucasfilm to maybe spin up a computer graphics group. So he was being interviewed to see whether he would be the leader of this group. George Lucas personally, did all these interviews, and he asked Ed, as he asked everybody else, hey, who else in industry should we be talking to? And Ed says, okay, well, you should talk to all these other big names in computer graphics, right? So Ed was super transparent, and he said, yeah, thanks for talking to me, but you should also be talking to, I don't know, Susan and Sven and Bob and all these other people. It turns out that Ed was the only respondent, the only interviewee that actually gave him an honest response. And oh, by the way, Lucas had already talked to every single other person on Ed's list, right? So Lucas is no dummy. He figured out who were the big names in computer graphics, and he interviewed all of them. But the test, such as it was, and maybe it wasn't even intended as a test, by the way, but it was telling, Ed, unique among those computer graphics luminaries, was willing to say, yeah, you should talk to the other people. Guess who got the job? Ed did. Guess who went on later to found Pixar and get multiple Academy Awards and be an author? It's that guy. So bringing confidence to your job and to your career has a very direct effect on your career trajectory. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Dunningkruger. Who's familiar with the idea of Dunningkruger? Yeah, surprising number. That's awesome. Okay, great. So Dunningkruger has two meanings. I will explain them. The first meaning is that when you are a beginner, crazily enough, you are the most confident about your skills when you are first introduced to a new thing. Why do you think that is? It's because you don't know what you don't know. Has anybody experienced, like I'm pretty old and grizzled, so like has everybody experienced like the young person, I was going to say young guy, usually it is the young guy by the way, who's like super, like 1 or 2 years out of school, they're super overconfident, like, oh yeah, distributed systems, that looks really easy. Yeah. Again, that overconfidence comes from, they call it here the peak of Mount Stupid. I love it. That overconfidence comes again from not knowing what you don't know. When you start to learn, oh my God, distributed systems actually is really hard, you achieve the valley of despair, and then you slowly, very slowly, through that 10,000 hours of effort that we talked about, climb up the slope and feel finally like you might know a little bit like what you're talking about, but you never reach that earlier point of overconfidence. Does it make sense? The expert in a field is not as confident as the novice. So that's the flip side, is that the experts in a field actually underestimate their abilities. Yeah? So the two halves of Dunning-Kruger are the young Turk overestimates his ability and the expert underestimates hers. Cool. But we need to know this, right? We need to know this. And again, why does the expert underestimate her abilities? Because she does know what she doesn't know. Does it make sense? Like, I've been doing distributed systems for literally 2 decades, and if people say, oh, you're an expert, like, no, I super am not an expert. There's a ton of things I don't know, and it's because like I kind of know where all the bodies are buried. So yeah, anyway, and I'm never as confident, at 20 years in as you might be 2 years in. All right, cool. One more thing about confidence, and then we'll talk about why it's important, and then we'll talk about how to get it. This is kind of an obvious statement. Confidence and your romantic attractiveness to people, or your attraction to other people, very highly linked. So attraction is about a certain primal magnetism, as Vanessa Van Edwards says. Of course, we can be physically attracted to somebody, but more often than not, it is actually their confidence and their passion and their personality. Does this sound familiar to people? Like when you meet somebody or you see somebody, like, why is that person so striking? Like maybe they're physically attractive as well, but usually the striking aspect is the confidence that they're exuding, not the physical characteristics. Does it make sense? Yeah. Cool. All right. Sorry, one more thing. I am a math major, as you will see in just the next moment. I think that confidence is a cubic equation. What do I mean by that? I mean it has a shape like this. When you are confident, you are more likely to try new things, and they will go well, and then you get more and more confident. Does it make sense? There's sort of a flywheel effect, a virtuous cycle when you are confident. Also, however, and I've absolutely personally experienced this in my life, not once but several times, is the other side. There is a vicious cycle when you are not confident, you, stay home, you don't try things, you don't trust yourself, and you get less and less and less confident. Does this sound familiar to people? Yeah, see lots of nods. Yeah. So where you need to get to, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, is you need to cross who's the math person that can tell me what it means to cross that zero? What do you call that thing? The origin. Another way to say it is the inflection point. I didn't ask it in a well, you knew that too. The inflection point, which is where you turn that concave down, lower confidence thing into the concave up, yeah, the concave up confidence flywheel, the vicious cycle on the one side into the virtuous cycle on the other. And that is literally called the inflection point, which we know in popular lingo as this change from one kind of trajectory into another kind of trajectory. Does it make sense? Cool. All right. Again, you can see where the engineer in me comes from. Like, this is like, oh, that makes total sense to me. And I hope it makes sense to some of you. And if it doesn't, then great. That's fine. Cool. All right. How are we going to build confidence? The second most viewed TED Talk so far, more than 40 million views, is by this woman, Amy Cuddy. She is a social psychologist at Harvard Business School. I strongly recommend taking the 15 minutes to watch this TED Talk. It is super inspiring. In 2002, she gave a talk which is called Your Body Language May Shape Who You Are. What she talks about and what she researches is nonverbal expressions of power and confidence. So what do we mean by this is nice academic language. What do we mean by a nonverbal expression of power and confidence? We mean, let's use another academic term, postural feedback. So what she says is adopting a power pose, like that Wonder Woman pose that she's demoing, or something where you're really open and look really powerful. This actually directly increases your feelings in the moment of power and confidence. And by the way, I am feeling the adrenaline right now as I do this. It activates our approach, people know approach avoidance. It activates our approach system rather than our avoidance system by being open. Does it make sense? And it also improves lots of other things. It improves our performance under stress. For example, when your bar has been raised at the last minute. It affects your mood and your motivation. It affects your assertiveness. And it actually also affects your physical strength. In case people have ever watched this thing, there was a part of her research where she claimed that it also influenced your hormone levels. That has not been replicated, but all these other effects have. Has anybody ever heard this? Fake it till you make it? My family comes from Germanic parts of Europe. This never worked for me. Like, I can't fake anything. Like, that's just, Germans don't do that. Happy to talk about why and how and whatever, in our therapy session later. But I cannot fake it till I make it. What I can do, though, is do it until I become it. Does it make sense? So it's not about faking it. It's just try. Try the first time. It won't go great. That's okay. First time I gave a talk, wasn't all that awesome. Second time a little bit better. Second time a little bit better, et cetera. Does it make sense? Do it, and just keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you become it. Does this also seem connected to the 10,000 hours? Yeah, totally is. All right, cool. Another thing I found in my personal life, and this is my own words, is find your core. What do I mean by that? Lots of us have, well, I'll say for myself, that I tried lots, when I was in that unconfident time in my life, I was trying to find a core, I didn't know what I was really doing, but I was trying to find a core strength that I could kind of rebuild my personality around. And I tried walking in the woods and athletics and all these kinds of things, and I now do a lot of those more than I used to. But the thing for me that is my core strength, yours is going to be different. It's very traditionally male, by the way. It is my profession. Being good at my job is the thing that if I don't have that, I am not confident in any other part of my life. But if I do have that, I am a better parent. I'm a single parent. I am a better parent. I am a better co-parent with my son's mom. I am better at relationships, both in the office and in my personal life. I'm better at other things. So for me, I found over time and messing around and flailing around that being good at my job is a thing that I built my thing around. That's, again, very classically male. You might find something else in this list that is your core, but I really strongly suggest that you try to find that because that's the thing that's really going to help you, accelerate forward. Cool. And again, that strength in one area, at least for me, has helped me be strong in lots of others. The last thing I want to say about confidence is this idea. Make yourself obsolete. So if you are in a very fearful mindset yourself or in a very fearful organization, you might, jealously hold on to your job. Again, very thematically related to things that Catherine was talking about earlier this morning. And I suggest that you don't do that. I suggest that you do something different. So Matt Klein is the founder of Envoy, not the company, but I mean Envoy, the service mesh or the whatever you call it, the really cool, whatever, thing that sits in between everything else. As you can see, I can't switch my brain between distributed systems and this stuff, but whatever. So Matt Klein recently went on a paternity leave, well-deserved. He had a daughter, fantastic. I think he's back at work now. But this is what he said, like while he was out. It's like mentoring himself out of a job was one of the hardest things that he needed to do, but it was exactly the thing that he needed to do for service proxy. That's the point. That's the word. For the service proxy of Envoy, for Lyft, and for himself. Here's what I said. I strongly believe, by the way, and I believe this very strongly. If you're a senior engineer or a leader in your team and you are not actively working to make yourself not needed, you're literally not doing your job. Does it make sense? There are lots of us here that are, you're growing and learning, being exposed to new technologies, maybe some new ideas here in this crazy, human factors track. Your team is hopefully working well without you. Notice that, right? What did you have to do to make that happen and continue to do that? And if you are at all fearful that your leadership will go something like, wow, Vanessa was so awesome, I don't need her anymore. You know what? She's fired. Like, no. Here's what you do. Hire the people that are going to automate themselves out of a job, and then just keep giving them more jobs. Right? Wow, you did an awesome job automating that. You're fired, said no manager ever. Does it make sense? Instead, what you say is, wow, you just took something that was 8 hours of manual effort and you made it a push-button thing. Here's this other thing that's twice harder. Go at that. Yeah? And you solve that. You climb that hill. And here's something that's 5 times harder. Go at that. Does that make sense? That is what a leader would do. That's what I hope you guys are doing with your teams. And that's what I hope you will engender with your behavior of automating yourself out or obsoleting yourself out of a job. Cool. Great. So we talked about growth mindset. We talked about trust. And we talked about confidence. Hopefully we connected all those things up with both personal lives and professional lives, and we sort of gave a little bit of science behind it, so the engineers in you, like in me, can be convinced that these things are actually real. But I do want to close, since we talked a little bit about the imposter syndrome or the imposter phenomenon, and we talked about it in the context of women in our industry. I want to close with hopefully the most famous woman in our industry, Grace Hopper, Admiral Grace Hopper. It's pretty important. She invented, the compiler. She's pretty serious. She says this. She says a ship in port is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. Sail out to sea and do new things. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Don't worry, we're good friends. It's fine. It's fine.
No. Oh yeah. Oh, so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are good friends. She's not. It's all good. It's all good.
We had some terrific ratings, but any questions? Yeah.
Tell my story.
Can you tell your story?
Which part did I hint about? Oh, imposter syndrome. Yes, I can. I was going to give this exact talk as a keynote 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, at QCon New York 2015. So it was the second day keynote. I was going through a divorce. My father was about to pass away, which actually did happen 6 weeks later. He was very sick in the hospital. Had a few other things going on. Oh, I had just left a job where I tried to turn the culture around, and because of Theory X boss, couldn't do it. And I was not really feeling great about myself, and I particularly didn't feel like I could give this talk. Like, who the hell am I to give you guys advice? Does it make sense what I'm saying? Seriously, oh yeah, I'm so great, all this stuff. Yeah, my life is a shambles. Yeah, I have now shared this with all the people involved, but I had to get the hell out. So I actually never gave that keynote. I left after the first day of the conference. I went home and I told everybody that it was because my father was about to pass away, which is absolutely true. But the truth is, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't bring it. And so it took me 2 years to be able to get to this point. I've told a lot more of the personal, cathartic part of this story. If you ever want to see kind of this thing again, there's a video of QCon San Francisco 2017, so the one in this past November, where I did give a lot more of my personal story and connected up with some of these ideas. So if you liked what we saw here, I would suggest that you watch that video. I tried, and again, the other kind of imposter syndrome thing I will say is, I was then asked by the QCon people to give this as a keynote in London, and it fell flat. It fell flat. And you want to know why? Because the catharsis only works one time. Yeah? I could only catharticate once. Cool. Other questions?
Other questions? No
Please,
more
yeah.
questions?
I'll repeat it if, oh yeah, here we go.
What flavor of mathematician are you? Could you be a bit more specific? Are you like an analyst or?
Oh, so I'm, well, I mean, what I am right now is a VP of engineering at WeWork, formerly VP of engineering at Stitch Fix, worked on distributed systems at eBay and Google. I studied applied math in my undergrad, but I practiced math only in the, all right, lame way that we practice math in computer science. Like few practicing computer scientists actually do more than multiply, to be honest. If you're a machine learning, actually, if you're machine learning people, like that's actually not true. So that's why I say few. And there are a few people, you know, in really hard algorithms that are actually like doing integrations and stuff. But like, it's not hard math what we do. Yeah. Cool. Other thoughts,
No more. I think we've got a chance for one more question. If anybody.
Please.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi.
Any quick tips on how to facilitate confidence in people around you, or things that have worked well?
Oh, that's great. Quickly? Yeah, it's really hard. I will say this, that I have a lot of really good friends who really helped when I was not feeling confident, and they said all the things you're supposed to say, and they like ping, 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 like didn't do anything. I think there's a longer and deeper conversation about a depressive approach to those things, where you like are completely like almost physiologically resistant to those ideas. I wish I had I really don't know. I'll say what I did for myself, which, I mean, what I did for me is not the only way it could work, but nothing anybody else said to me helped me in any way. I had to, this is very Buddhist, I had to come through it myself, and I had to accept. I had to accept the things that I couldn't change, and when I did that, it was like I had been holding back this this dam, and like it was all dry and like black and white, and then I finally just let go, and the water came through, and the sun came out, and like that was my experience, but it was not fun. Yeah, I don't know how to do it with other people. Be nice to them. Be empathetic. No, I mean that's not even like here's what I should say. Do all the things you already know to do, and recognize they might not help, but still do them anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, thanks.
Round of applause. Thank you very much.